You know the problem with charity galas? Vanessa Whitmore said loudly as she lifted her crystal wine glass beneath the chandelier light. They keep forgetting to separate the guests from the help. The laughter came quickly, soft at first, then spreading across the ballroom in polished little ripples as servers moved silently between marble columns carrying silver trays filled with champagne flutes and lobster crostini. Sterling Hall glowed gold that night, every inch of the historic Manhattan hotel polished to perfection for the annual Whitmore Foundation fundraiser. Strings from a live quartet floated through the air while cameras flashed near the grand staircase where New York's wealthiest families posed beneath a 20-foot floral arrangement imported from Italy that morning. Vanessa stood at the center of it all in a silver designer gown that shimmered every time she moved. People watched her the way people always watched women who had inherited both beauty and power. Her husband sat on the hotel's executive board. Her face appeared regularly in society magazines. In rooms like this, Vanessa never doubted she belonged. Then her eyes landed on the woman near the auction table. Black dress. Simple heels. No diamonds. No entourage. No attempt to impress anyone. The woman stood quietly beside the wall studying the framed photographs displayed for the charity auction, one hand wrapped around a cream-colored invitation card. Her posture was calm, elegant even, but to Vanessa she looked out of place among the silk tuxedos and million-dollar smiles. "Excuse me," Vanessa called while approaching with two of her friends behind her. "Staff entrance is through the kitchen hallway." A few nearby guests turned their heads. The woman looked up slowly. Her expression didn't change. Up close, she looked to be in her mid-30s, composed, beautiful in a way that didn't beg for attention. Her dark curls rested neatly against her shoulders, and her eyes held the kind of stillness that made loud people uncomfortable. "I'm not staff," she replied softly. Vanessa smiled without warmth. "Oh. Then someone in valet must have made a mistake." Another burst of laughter drifted through the crowd. The woman glanced down briefly at the invitation in her hand, now slightly bent where her fingers tightened around it. For a moment, it looked like she might walk away. Instead, she simply said, "I was invited." Vanessa tilted her head. "By who?" Before the woman could answer, Vanessa shifted her wine glass carelessly. The deep red Cabernet spilled forward in a sudden wave across the front of the woman's black silk dress. Gasps fluttered through the ballroom. Wine dripped slowly down the fabric like dark blood beneath the chandelier glow. "Oh my God," Vanessa said dramatically, though the smirk at the corner of her mouth betrayed her. "I thought you were catering staff." This time the laughter came louder. Several people turned away awkwardly while others openly stared. Somewhere near the stage, the violinist missed a note. The woman looked down at the stains spreading across her dress. Then she lifted her eyes back to Vanessa. Calm. Silent. Almost frighteningly calm. She reached into her purse, removed a folded handkerchief, and gently pressed it against the fabric without rushing. Vanessa crossed her arms, waiting for embarrassment, anger, anything. But the woman offered neither. The ballroom suddenly felt colder somehow, quieter beneath the music and crystal lights. One elderly man near the bar lowered his drink slowly as if sensing something shift beneath the surface of the evening. The woman folded the stained handkerchief carefully into her palm and spoke in a voice so steady it forced everyone nearby to listen. "My mother worked in this hotel 22 years ago," she said. "One night she spilled wine on herself during a banquet, and they escorted her out through the kitchen because they said she ruined the atmosphere." Vanessa's smile faded slightly. Around them, conversations began dying one by one. The woman looked around the ballroom, taking in the chandeliers, the marble staircase, the people pretending not to stare. Then she met Vanessa's eyes again. Funny how some things never change. The silence did not break all at once. It cracked slowly, table by table, whisper by whisper, like ice beginning to split across a frozen lake. Vanessa Whitmore stood motionless with the empty wine glass still hanging loosely between her fingers while several guests nearby suddenly found their champagne very interesting. Nobody laughed anymore. Naomi Carter folded the stained handkerchief once more and slipped it calmly into her purse. The deep burgundy stain across her dress had darkened beneath the ballroom lights, but somehow it only made her presence stronger. One of the servers approached nervously holding a towel. "Ma'am, I can help with that." Naomi offered him a small smile. "Thank you." Her voice stayed warm, steady, untouched by humiliation. That seemed to unsettle Vanessa more than anger would have. The quartet continued playing softly near the staircase, but the music no longer filled the room the same way. Something heavier sat in the air now. Naomi accepted the towel and gently pressed it against the silk fabric while her eyes drifted toward the enormous crystal chandelier hanging above the ballroom floor. For a brief second, the reflection of gold light in the glass reminded her of another night long ago. She had been 12 years old, standing barefoot near the service elevator while her mother scrubbed wine from a carpet at nearly midnight. Naomi could still remember the smell of bleach in the hallway. The exhaustion in her mother's shoulders. The way hotel guests passed by without ever looking directly at them. "Keep your head down," her mother used to whisper while folding table linens with tired hands. "Some people only see uniforms." Naomi had never forgotten that sentence. Even after graduating from Northwestern. Even after building Carter Equity Partners from a one-room office in Chicago into one of the fastest-growing real estate firms in the Midwest. Even after financial magazines started printing her face beside headlines about luxury acquisitions and billion-dollar redevelopment deals. Rooms like this still tested whether success could truly change what people saw first. Vanessa finally cleared her throat. "Look, if you are expecting some dramatic apology, I think everyone here is being a little oversensitive." A few uncomfortable smiles appeared around her, weak and uncertain. Naomi turned toward her slowly. "You think this is about the dress?" Vanessa lifted her chin defensively. "I think people are acting like I committed a crime over an accident." Naomi studied her for a moment. The marble floors reflected silver light beneath their feet while waiters quietly disappeared toward the kitchen, sensing tension the way staff members always did in wealthy rooms. "Accidents happen," Naomi said softly. "Character happens on purpose." Vanessa's jaw tightened. Nearby, an older board member named Richard Sterling lowered his whiskey glass with sudden interest. Naomi recognized him immediately from corporate filings and acquisition reports. He had inherited Sterling Hall from his father decades earlier and spent most of his life protecting the hotel's image like it was royalty. Richard stared carefully at Naomi now, his expression shifting from confusion to something else. Recognition. Naomi saw it happen in real time. His eyes flicked briefly toward the invitation card still resting in her hand. Then toward the legal team near the stage entrance. Vanessa noticed it too. "Richard," she asked quietly. But he did not answer her. Across the ballroom, large digital screens suddenly flickered to life with the Sterling Hall crest glowing gold against black velvet curtains. The charity auction was about to begin. Guests slowly returned toward their seats while servers adjusted chairs and collected empty glasses. Naomi handed the towel back to the nervous young waiter. "Thank you," she said again. Then without another word, she stepped away from Vanessa and started walking toward the front of the ballroom. The sound of her heels against the marble floor echoed softly beneath the chandeliers. Not rushed. Not angry. Just certain. Several people turned in their seats to watch her move through the crowd. Vanessa blinked in disbelief before quickly following behind. "Excuse me," she called sharply. "The owner section is reserved." Naomi did not stop walking. The orchestra faded lower as the ballroom lights dimmed to a warm amber glow. At the front of the room, just beneath the massive stage screen, two men in dark suits suddenly straightened the moment they saw Naomi approaching. And for the first time that night, Vanessa Whitmore felt something cold slide quietly into her chest. Vanessa Whitmore quickened her pace across the ballroom floor, the sharp sound of her heels cutting through the low murmur spreading among the guests. "Excuse me," she called again, louder this time. "I do not think you understand how this event works." Naomi Carter continued forward without looking back. The soft amber lights above the ballroom reflected across the polished marble beneath her shoes while dozens of eyes followed her movement toward the stage. Somewhere near the back bar, a waiter nearly dropped a tray after noticing the two security men straighten immediately at Naomi's approach. Vanessa finally stepped in front of her, blocking the path just a few feet from the reserved owner section lined with velvet chairs and gold nameplates. "This area is private," Vanessa said tightly. "You cannot just wander up here because you are upset." Naomi stopped. The stain across her black dress had begun drying at the edges, leaving deep crimson shadows beneath the chandelier glow. For a moment she simply looked at Vanessa, not with anger, not with fear, but with the calm patience of someone watching a storm tire itself out. "Move," Naomi said quietly. The word landed harder than shouting would have. Vanessa gave a short laugh, though the confidence inside it sounded thinner now. "You know what your problem is?" she asked. "People hand you one invitation to a fancy room and suddenly you think you belong there." Naomi lowered her eyes briefly toward the silver bracelet resting on her wrist. It had belonged to her mother. The edges were slightly worn from decades of use, but Naomi still remembered the way her mother polished it every Sunday morning before church, even after long overnight shifts at the hotel. She used to say dignity mattered most in places designed to strip it away. "Belonging is an interesting word," Naomi replied softly. "Especially in a building my family helped keep standing for over 20 years. Vanessa folded her arms. "Your family cleaned the building. That is not the same thing." A few nearby guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Richard Sterling had moved closer now, his weathered face unreadable beneath the ballroom light. Beside him stood two attorneys whispering urgently to each other while repeatedly checking their phones. Naomi noticed them but remained perfectly still. Vanessa noticed them too. Her confidence flickered again. "Richard," she said carefully, "can someone please explain what is happening?" Before he could answer, the ballroom microphone suddenly crackled softly overhead. Conversations stopped almost instantly. The orchestra lowered their instruments. Near the stage, a silver-haired woman stepped to the podium holding a black folder embossed with the Sterling Hall crest. Naomi recognized her immediately. Eleanor Price, lead counsel for the acquisition board. Eleanor adjusted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced warmly, "thank you for joining us tonight for a truly historic evening in Sterling Hall's future." The giant digital screens behind the stage brightened, displaying old photographs of the hotel through the decades. Black and white images faded one after another across the screen. Grand openings, charity galas, politicians, celebrities. Generations of wealth wrapped in crystal chandeliers and polished marble. Vanessa slowly turned toward the stage, confusion creeping across her face. "As many of you know," Eleanor continued, "Sterling Hall has officially completed its ownership transition after nearly 11 months of negotiations and restructuring." A low murmur rolled through the ballroom. Naomi remained motionless beneath the warm amber light while Eleanor opened the folder in her hands. "Tonight," she said, smiling gently toward the crowd, "we welcome the new majority owner and chief executive chairwoman of Sterling Hall International." Vanessa blinked once. Then twice. Her eyes shifted toward Naomi standing only a few feet away. Around the ballroom, several guests began realizing the same thing at the same exact moment. Naomi finally lifted her gaze toward the stage as Eleanor spoke the final words clearly into the microphone. "Please join me in welcoming Ms. Naomi Carter." Silence crashed across the ballroom so completely that even the ice clinking inside champagne glasses suddenly sounded loud. Vanessa's face lost all color. The empty wine glass slipped from her fingertips and shattered softly against the marble floor beside her silver heels. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. The shattered wine glass beside Vanessa Whitmore's heels glittered across the marble floor like scattered ice beneath the chandeliers while the final echoes of Eleanor Price's announcement drifted through the ballroom. Naomi Carter stood quietly at the center of the silence with one hand resting lightly against the stained fabric of her dress. Her expression never changed. Around her, faces that had once looked amused now looked uncertain and embarrassed, almost frightened by how quickly power had shifted in the room. Vanessa stared at Naomi as if her mind refused to process what her ears had just heard. "No," she whispered under her breath. "That is not possible." But across the ballroom, the giant screens behind the stage continued displaying legal documents, acquisition headlines, and financial summaries bearing one name in elegant gold lettering: Carter Equity Partners. Several guests immediately reached for their phones. Others lowered their eyes altogether. Richard Sterling stepped forward first. His polished leather shoes crossed the marble carefully until he stood directly in front of Naomi. The old businessman straightened his jacket before extending his hand respectfully. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice quieter than before, "welcome to Sterling Hall." Naomi accepted the handshake with calm grace. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." Vanessa's throat tightened visibly. Just minutes earlier she had spoken over Naomi like she was invisible. Now one of the most powerful men in Manhattan stood greeting her like royalty. The contrast hit the room all at once. Eleanor Price smiled toward the crowd. Tonight marks the first time in the hotel's 112-year history that Sterling Hall will operate under independent ownership outside the Sterling family board. Applause began slowly near the front tables before spreading cautiously through the ballroom. Naomi acknowledged it with only a small nod. She did not smile widely. She did not celebrate. Her eyes drifted instead toward the service hallway near the back corner of the room where hotel staff members stood frozen in disbelief beside silver trays and linen carts. Naomi recognized the expressions on their faces immediately. Some looked proud. Some looked emotional. One older housekeeper quietly pressed a hand against her mouth as tears gathered in her eyes. Naomi remembered those hallways. The smell of industrial detergent before sunrise. Her mother changing shoes during double shifts because swollen feet made walking painful by midnight. Tiny break rooms hidden beneath glamorous ballrooms where workers ate cold sandwiches while wealthy guests danced overhead without ever noticing them. "This hotel raised me," Naomi said softly into the microphone after Eleanor handed it to her. The ballroom grew silent again. Naomi glanced briefly toward the stain still visible across her black dress before continuing. "My mother worked here for 23 years. She polished these floors, folded these linens, cleaned these tables after nights exactly like this one. Not a single glass moved now. Most people never learned her name," Naomi continued. "But she taught me something important. She taught me that dignity is not something wealthy people get to hand out." Vanessa lowered her eyes for the first time that evening. The words landed like quiet thunder beneath the chandeliers. Naomi's voice never rose. That made every sentence hit harder. "Tonight is not about revenge," she said. "It is about respect. Because every person who walks through these doors deserves to feel human before they feel judged." Somewhere near the center table, a man slowly began clapping again. Then another joined. Then another. Within seconds the ballroom filled with applause stronger than before, no longer polite but genuine. Vanessa remained perfectly still beside the shattered remains of her wine glass while cameras flashed around Naomi from every direction. One reporter whispered, "That is her? That is Naomi Carter?" Another guest muttered quietly, "She built a $4 billion portfolio from nothing." Vanessa heard every word. Her face burned beneath the ballroom lights. Naomi stepped away from the podium then, moving calmly down the small staircase beside the stage. The applause continued following her through the room while servers straightened their posture instinctively as she passed. Near the edge of the ballroom floor, Naomi paused briefly beside the young waiter who had offered her the towel earlier. "What is your name?" she asked gently. The young man blinked in surprise. "Daniel, ma'am." Naomi smiled softly. "Thank you for treating me kindly tonight, Daniel." His eyes widened slightly. Nobody important had ever remembered his name at one of these events before. And standing only a few feet away, Vanessa Whitmore suddenly understood something far more painful than public embarrassment. Naomi Carter had walked into the ballroom with more class, more grace, and more power than anyone there had recognized. The applause lingered long after Naomi Carter stepped away from the stage, but the energy inside Sterling Hall had changed completely. Conversations no longer sounded effortless. Laughter no longer flowed naturally beneath the chandeliers. Every smile in the ballroom now carried calculation behind it. People who had ignored Naomi an hour earlier suddenly watched her every movement with nervous attention. Wealthy donors adjusted their tuxedos before approaching her. Board members who had barely acknowledged the existence of hotel staff now stood straighter whenever an employee passed nearby. The room had become painfully aware of itself. Naomi moved calmly through the crowd, thanking investors, greeting attorneys, and shaking hands with the composed confidence of someone who had spent years surviving rooms exactly like this one. Yet beneath the polished atmosphere, tension still lingered like smoke after a fire. Vanessa Whitmore stood alone near the edge of the ballroom beside a towering floral arrangement of white orchids and gold roses. Her silver gown still sparkled beneath the lights, but now it felt almost fragile against the weight of hundreds of silent glances drifting toward her from across the room. Two women she considered close friends whispered beside the champagne table before quickly looking away when Vanessa noticed them. Even her husband, Charles Whitmore, had disappeared into a conversation with board attorneys near the stage, avoiding eye contact altogether. Vanessa reached for another glass of champagne, but her hand trembled slightly before she lowered it again untouched. She had spent her entire adult life mastering rooms like this. Charity galas. Fundraisers. Political dinners. She knew exactly how power worked among Manhattan elites. Or at least she thought she did. Across the ballroom, Naomi paused near one of the old black and white photographs displayed beside the auction area. It showed Sterling Hall during the winter of 1987, decorated with enormous Christmas wreaths while staff members stood in the background preparing the ballroom for a holiday banquet. Naomi stepped closer to the frame slowly. There, barely visible near the far left corner of the photograph, stood her mother. Young. Exhausted. Wearing a housekeeping uniform while balancing folded table linens in her arms. Naomi stared at the image quietly as memories rose inside her chest like old music. She remembered waiting after school in tiny maintenance offices while her mother finished double shifts. She remembered eating vending machine crackers at midnight while snow pressed against the windows outside. She remembered hearing wealthy guests complain about things her family could never afford to waste. One afternoon when Naomi was 14, she overheard a hotel guest asking management if people like that were allowed near the ballroom entrance because it ruined the atmosphere. Her mother had pretended not to hear. But Naomi never forgot. "Your mother would be proud of you." The voice came gently from beside her. Naomi turned to find Richard Sterling standing there holding two champagne glasses. He offered one politely. Naomi accepted it with a small nod. "Thank you." Richard looked toward the old photograph. "I remember her," he admitted quietly. "Margaret Carter. She worked harder than almost anyone in this building." Naomi's eyes softened slightly. She believed hard work guaranteed respect. Richard lowered his gaze. "The world does not always work that way." Naomi glanced across the ballroom toward Vanessa standing alone beneath the chandeliers. "No," she said softly. "It usually does not." Before Richard could answer, Vanessa suddenly approached them, her heels slower now, her posture far less certain than before. Several nearby conversations immediately faded as guests sensed another confrontation unfolding. Vanessa stopped a few feet from Naomi, gripping a champagne glass tightly enough for her knuckles to pale beneath the ballroom light. "I would like a moment to speak privately," Vanessa said carefully. Naomi studied her expression. Gone was the mocking smile from earlier. Gone was the effortless superiority. What remained looked closer to panic. Richard quietly excused himself, stepping away into the crowd while nearby guests pretended not to watch. Vanessa exhaled slowly before speaking again. "I did not know who you were." Naomi's eyes remained steady. "That is exactly the problem." Vanessa swallowed hard. The words landed deeper now than they had on stage. Around them, the ballroom shimmered with gold light and soft violin music, but for Vanessa the room no longer felt glamorous. It felt exposed. Small. Every polished surface suddenly reflected the ugliest version of herself back at her. The ballroom slowly regained its rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted beneath the gold chandeliers and polished marble floors of Sterling Hall. Conversations returned in careful waves. Crystal glasses clinked softly again. The orchestra resumed its music near the staircase, though quieter now, as if even the musicians sensed the weight lingering in the room. Naomi Carter stood near the tall windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan while rain began tapping lightly against the glass outside. Tiny streaks of water slid down the dark skyline beyond the ballroom, blurring the city lights into gold and silver ribbons. In the reflection on the window, Naomi could still see the stain across her dress. Deep red against black silk. She touched the fabric lightly with her fingertips, then lowered her hand again. Vanessa Whitmore remained standing a few feet behind her, uncertain for perhaps the first time in years. She looked smaller now somehow. The confidence that once filled every movement had drained away beneath the reality of what she had revealed about herself in front of the entire room. "I am sorry," Vanessa finally said quietly. The words came slowly, awkwardly, like they hurt to say out loud. Naomi did not answer immediately. Outside, thunder rolled softly somewhere far beyond the city while yellow taxi lights drifted below like tiny moving stars. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" Naomi asked at last, still facing the rain-covered window. Vanessa swallowed. "What?" Naomi's reflection met hers through the glass. It was not the wine. The silence between them deepened. "It was how easy it was for you," Naomi continued softly. "You looked at me and decided exactly how much respect I deserved before I even spoke." Vanessa lowered her eyes. Around them, wealthy donors continued sipping champagne beneath glittering chandeliers while waiters carried silver trays through the ballroom with practiced invisibility. Naomi watched them carefully. She noticed how some guests still barely acknowledged the staff members moving around them. Old habits survived even after public embarrassment. "My mother used to stand in this exact ballroom after midnight," Naomi said quietly. "Sometimes her feet hurt so badly she could barely walk home." Vanessa remained silent. Naomi's voice stayed calm, but every sentence carried the weight of memory behind it. "One winter, she worked 16 straight days because another housekeeper got sick. She missed Christmas morning with me because somebody important booked a private holiday event here." Naomi glanced toward the ceiling lights glowing warmly overhead. She spent her entire life making places like this beautiful for people who never bothered learning her name. Vanessa's eyes glistened slightly now beneath the ballroom light. "I did not know." Naomi turned slowly to face her fully for the first time since the reveal on stage. "That is the point," she said gently. "People like my mother were never meant to be noticed. Only used." The words settled heavily between them. Not angry. Not cruel. Just true. Vanessa looked down at her own reflection in the polished marble floor. She remembered laughing earlier. Remembered the smirk on her face when the wine spilled. remembered how natural it had felt to assume Naomi belonged near the service entrance instead of the ballroom floor. And suddenly none of it felt elegant anymore. It felt ugly. Childish. Empty. Near the orchestra platform, Daniel the young waiter quietly adjusted silverware at one of the tables while occasionally glancing toward Naomi with visible admiration. Naomi noticed him and offered a small reassuring smile. Daniel smiled back nervously before returning to work. Vanessa followed the exchange silently. "You remembered his name," she whispered. Naomi nodded once. "My mother taught me something else too." Vanessa looked up slowly. "What was that?" Naomi's eyes softened slightly. "The people carrying trays usually see more truth than the people holding the microphones." A faint laugh escaped Vanessa then, but it broke halfway through into something closer to shame. She brushed quickly beneath her eyes before anyone nearby could notice. Across the ballroom, cameras continued flashing around wealthy donors and charity speeches, but the noise suddenly felt distant compared to the quiet conversation unfolding beside the rain-streaked windows. Naomi looked back toward the city lights outside. Her expression remained calm, thoughtful, untouched by bitterness. And standing beside her beneath the warm chandelier glow, Vanessa Whitmore realized that grace looked very different from power. Rain continued sliding down the enormous ballroom windows while the city outside shimmered beneath wet streets and blurred headlights. Inside Sterling Hall, the fundraiser had shifted into something quieter now. The orchestra played soft piano arrangements instead of bright jazz. Conversations stayed lower, more careful, as if everyone feared saying the wrong thing in a room that had already exposed too much truth in one night. Naomi Carter stood near the balcony doors speaking with several board members about upcoming renovations planned for the hotel. Her voice remained calm and focused, but every employee who passed by noticed something unusual. She looked directly at them. She thanked them. She listened when they spoke. Tiny gestures most wealthy owners never considered important. Daniel nearly dropped a stack of menus after Naomi asked whether he was attending college. A housekeeping supervisor named Rosa blinked in disbelief when Naomi complimented the staff's professionalism during the event. Word traveled quickly through the service hallways beneath the ballroom. The new owner noticed people. That alone felt revolutionary. Vanessa Whitmore watched everything from across the room. Earlier that evening she had commanded attention effortlessly. Now she felt invisible in the worst possible way. Not ignored. Seen too clearly. Every polished surface inside Sterling Hall seemed to reflect pieces of her behavior back at her. The laughter. The assumption. The cruelty disguised as sophistication. She could still hear herself saying staff entrance with that same careless confidence people used when they believed status protected them from consequences. Charles Whitmore approached quietly beside her holding 2 untouched champagne glasses. "You should probably speak to her again," he murmured. Vanessa stared toward Naomi near the ballroom doors. "What would I even say?" Charles hesitated. "Something honest for once." Vanessa almost laughed at that, but exhaustion pulled the sound from her throat before it fully formed. She had spent years mastering appearances. Smiling at charity galas. Hosting dinners. Memorizing the names of politicians and donors. Yet standing in this ballroom tonight, she realized Naomi possessed something far more difficult to imitate. Authentic dignity. And it unsettled her more than money ever could. Across the room, Naomi stepped away from the board members after noticing movement near the service entrance. An older janitor struggled quietly with a leaking maintenance cart while beside the hallway. Without hesitation, Naomi crossed the ballroom floor toward him. Several guests looked confused watching the owner of Sterling Hall kneel slightly beside a maintenance cart in the middle of a luxury fundraiser. "Let me help you," Naomi said gently. The older man looked startled. "No, ma'am, I got it." Naomi smiled softly. "My mother used to fix those wheels with a butter knife from the kitchen." The janitor blinked before laughing quietly in surprise. Together they adjusted the loose wheel while expensive gowns swept past them across the marble floor. Vanessa watched the moment unfold with growing disbelief. Naomi had every reason to humiliate people tonight. Every reason to enjoy their discomfort after what happened. Yet she moved through the ballroom with patience instead of revenge. That realization hurt more deeply than public embarrassment ever could. Vanessa slowly crossed the room toward Naomi again, this time without performance in her posture. No dramatic confidence. No social mask. Just a woman carrying the weight of finally understanding herself clearly. Naomi stood after fixing the cartwheel while the janitor thanked her repeatedly before disappearing gratefully down the hallway. Vanessa stopped a few feet away. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked quietly. Naomi looked at her for a long moment while soft rain tapped against the windows behind them. "Because somebody has to break the pattern," Naomi answered. Vanessa's eyes lowered immediately. The words cut gently but deeply. Around them, the ballroom continued glowing beneath gold chandeliers while wealthy guests resumed sipping champagne and discussing business deals. Yet for Vanessa, the room no longer looked the same. She noticed things now she had ignored for years. The tired eyes behind polite staff smiles. The speed waiters moved whenever wealthy guests snapped their fingers. The invisible labor holding luxury together every single night. Naomi glanced toward the rain outside once more before speaking again, her voice barely above the piano music drifting through the ballroom. "Power shows people who you are," she said softly. "But kindness shows whether you are worth remembering." Vanessa stood speechless beneath the chandelier light while Naomi turned calmly toward the balcony doors overlooking the city. And for the first time in a very long time, Vanessa Whitmore felt ashamed not because she had been embarrassed publicly, but because she had finally seen the kind of person she had become. By the time the fundraiser dinner ended, the rain outside had slowed to a soft mist drifting across the Manhattan streets below Sterling Hall. Guests began filtering slowly toward the exits beneath the glow of brass chandeliers and velvet hallway lights. Expensive coats were gathered. Valet tickets exchanged hands. Conversations stayed unusually subdued as people carried the memory of the evening with them into the cold New York night. Naomi Carter remained near the ballroom balcony overlooking the city while hotel staff quietly cleared empty champagne glasses and folded white linen napkins from the tables. The stain across Naomi's black dress had faded slightly after being cleaned, though a faint crimson shadow still remained beneath the fabric. She had not changed clothes. Somehow the mark felt important to keep for a little while longer. Vanessa Whitmore stood alone near the edge of the ballroom for several minutes before finally gathering the courage to walk toward her again. This time there was no audience left to impress. No reporters nearby. No wealthy donors listening. Just the low sound of piano music drifting from the empty stage and the quiet movement of employees finishing another long night of work. Vanessa stopped beside Naomi beneath the tall windows. "I owe you more than an apology," she said softly. Naomi turned toward her calmly. Vanessa's mascara had faded slightly beneath tired eyes that no longer carried the sharp arrogance from earlier that evening. "I have spent so many years believing kindness was something optional," Vanessa admitted. "Something people used when it was convenient." Naomi remained silent, allowing the word space to exist honestly for the first time. Vanessa looked down at her own reflection in the dark window glass. "Tonight I realized how ugly that made me." Outside, headlights drifted through the rain below like moving ribbons of gold. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed briefly through the city before fading away. Naomi folded her hands gently in front of her. "Most people never notice when they become cruel," she said quietly. "You noticed. That matters." Vanessa shook her head faintly. "Does it?" Naomi's eyes softened. "It is where change starts." For a moment neither woman spoke. Nearby, Daniel carefully stacked silver trays onto a rolling cart while Rosa supervised cleanup near the ballroom entrance. Several staff members occasionally glanced toward Naomi with admiration still visible in their expressions. Vanessa noticed that too. They trusted Naomi already in ways nobody had ever trusted her. Not because Naomi owned the building now, but because she saw people clearly. That difference settled heavily inside Vanessa's chest. "There is something else," Vanessa said carefully. Naomi looked at her. Vanessa hesitated before continuing. Earlier this year, the board proposed cutting overnight staffing benefits to save money during the ownership transition. Naomi's expression sharpened slightly. "I know." Vanessa blinked in surprise. Naomi gave a small nod. "I reviewed every board vote before finalizing the acquisition." Vanessa lowered her eyes immediately. "I supported the cuts." The confession landed quietly between them. Housekeeping. Kitchen staff. Maintenance crews. People already working double shifts. Vanessa's voice trembled slightly now. "I never even asked what it would do to their families." Naomi studied her silently. "My mother was one of those overnight workers," she said softly. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly as shame crossed her face again. "I know that now." The ballroom lights dimmed slightly overhead as staff members began shutting down sections of the hall for the night. Warm golden reflections stretched across the polished marble floors while rain whispered softly against the windows. Naomi finally stepped closer to Vanessa. Not intimidating. Not triumphant. Just human. "You cannot undo tonight," Naomi said gently. "But you can decide who you become after it." Vanessa looked at her with wet eyes. "Why are you giving me grace after everything I did?" Naomi glanced briefly toward the ballroom where hotel employees continued cleaning beneath fading chandelier light. "Because somebody once gave it to my mother," she answered quietly. A woman she barely knew defended her after another guest humiliated her here years ago. "My mother never forgot it." Naomi smiled faintly then, almost sadly. "Kindness survives longer than cruelty does." Vanessa stood speechless while the final piano notes drifted softly through the nearly empty ballroom. For the first time in many years, she felt no desire to protect her image or defend herself. Only the painful understanding that real class had nothing to do with money, status, or invitation lists. And standing beside the woman she had once dismissed so easily, Vanessa Whitmore finally understood the difference between being admired and being worthy. Near midnight, Sterling Hall finally grew quiet. The last guests disappeared into the rain-soaked Manhattan streets while black luxury cars rolled slowly away from the front entrance beneath glowing brass lanterns. Inside the ballroom, the chandeliers had dimmed to a softer gold, casting long reflections across marble floors that were finally empty except for hotel staff finishing the final cleanup of the evening. The orchestra had gone home hours ago. Only the faint hum of air vents and the distant rattle of silverware carts remained beneath the enormous ceilings. Naomi Carter stood alone near the center of the ballroom holding her mother's silver bracelet loosely between her fingers. The faint wine stain still marked the front of her black dress, darker now beneath the low light. She looked around the room slowly. The grand staircase. The crystal chandeliers. The polished tables. For most people, Sterling Hall was a symbol of luxury. For Naomi, it had once been the place where her mother came home exhausted every night with swollen feet and tired hands. She could almost still hear the soft squeak of housekeeping carts rolling across these floors long after midnight. Rosa approached quietly carrying a folded coat over her arm. "You are going to catch cold standing by those windows," she said gently. Naomi smiled and accepted the coat. "Thank you." Rosa hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Your mother used to talk about you all the time." Naomi's expression softened immediately. "Really?" Rosa nodded with a faint laugh. "Every break room. Every overnight shift," she said. One day her daughter would walk through the front doors of this hotel and nobody would ever look down on her again. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly while emotion flickered quietly across her face. She believed in me before anyone else did. Rosa touched Naomi's arm gently. Looks like she was right. Across the ballroom, Daniel and two maintenance workers carefully replaced the broken wine glass from earlier that evening. The shattered pieces had already been swept away. Only the memory remained now. Naomi watched them silently for a moment before walking toward the center of the room. The marble floor gleamed beneath the chandeliers like still water. Every sound echoed softly in the emptiness. Near the ballroom entrance, Vanessa Whitmore stood quietly in a simple wool coat with her purse resting against one shoulder. She looked different without the performance of the gala around her. Smaller somehow. More human. Naomi noticed her immediately. Vanessa stepped forward slowly. I wanted to say goodbye before I left. Naomi nodded politely. Neither woman spoke for a few seconds. The silence no longer felt hostile now. Just honest. Vanessa glanced around the nearly empty ballroom before speaking softly. I used to think rooms like this proved who mattered. Naomi followed her gaze toward the chandeliers overhead. Rooms only reveal people, she answered quietly. They do not define them. Vanessa swallowed hard before offering a small envelope toward Naomi. I wrote letters tonight to reverse every staffing cut proposal I supported this year. Benefits too. Naomi accepted the envelope without opening it. Vanessa managed a faint, emotional smile. It is not enough. I know that. Naomi looked at her for a long moment before speaking gently. Change rarely starts with grand gestures. Vanessa nodded slowly. Thank you for not humiliating me tonight. Naomi's eyes drifted briefly toward the faint wine stain still visible against her dress. Then back to Vanessa. Some people already spend their whole lives being humiliated, she said softly. I had no interest in becoming one more person who does that. Vanessa's eyes filled again, but this time she did not hide it. She simply nodded once before quietly walking toward the exit beneath the soft ballroom lights. Naomi remained standing alone near the center of Sterling Hall while staff members continued shutting down the room around her. One by one, chandeliers dimmed overhead until only a warm golden glow remained above the marble floor. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The city lights shimmered through the tall windows while somewhere below, a doorman opened the front entrance for a late-arriving housekeeper beginning the overnight shift. Naomi watched her step quietly inside carrying a worn canvas bag and tired eyes. Then slowly, beneath the fading light of Sterling Hall, Naomi Carter smiled.